Ledger is a writing podcast, and the newest episode is today. I'm your host, Austin Wilson. Welcome to today's show, where I am chatting with Caroline Bicks, a Shakespeare scholar who is also the inaugural Stephen E. King Chair in Literature at the University of Maine. Maybe you've heard of him. That's a position which led to Caroline being the first scholar granted extended access to Mr. King's private archives. That process led to her close reading and study of many early manuscripts of Mr. King, and that led to her writing a book called Monsters in the Archives, out now from Hogarth, which she is here to talk about. Caroline's freaking awesome. I had so many questions I didn't get to because I just had such a blast talking to her about her book and writing and her life and Stephen King's writing. We talk about that a lot because we're both very obviously fans. So we chat about, her family supporting her intellectual pursuits, even as a kid, and her experiences with anxiety as a young person. We talk about anti-intellectualism based in classist narratives and people, crapping on scholarly writing or scholarly thinking. And we talk about the language of Stephen King's fiction and why it works. We talk about Shakespeare and King as messengers of humanity rather than of horror. And we talk about why Harold Bluhm was a freaking turd, and we talk about Stephen King a lot. We talk about a lot of Stephen King stuff because we both love his writing. This conversation, it seriously got me so excited about writing and words and language, and it made me want to get back to the page as soon as possible, which is one of my favorite things that happens whenever I do interviews that hit me like this one. It seriously was just such a blast. Caroline's really, really fun to talk to, really easy to talk to, and her book is definitely one that I think anyone who loves thinking about writing and why it works and how it works, I really think you need to pick a copy of it up because it really just cuts to the core of why writers do what they do and how they go about doing it. Sometimes it's awesome. And I think especially for any Stephen King fan that is also interested in writing as a profession or a craft, I really think it's gonna be a book that you'll love. Make sure you go to carolinebicks.com. Her last name is spelled Bicks. Check out more of her work. Grab a copy of Monsters in the Archives if you want to dive into King's writing and learn more about his early drafts. Some great novels and some short stories, and you also get to read about Caroline's journey into those stories and some of her memories in her own life. You can pick up the book at the bookshop.org affiliate link in the show notes if you want to support the show. Thank you so much to Caroline for stopping by, and thank you for listening. As for me, go to austinrwilson.com to read my work, or now, brand new, I have had it for a bit, but now I have some new updates. Go to my Patreon, patreon.shibboleth.me, and support me on a monthly basis if you like. I do have a donate page on my website that you can just do single support if you want to do that. But at my Patreon, you will get some other stuff, including some weird horror and sci-fi fiction, behind-the-scenes info about upcoming shows, maybe some notes on shows I've already published, maybe videos. I have gotten a new camera, and I have some stuff that I'm working on, but it's not ready yet, so look out for that. This podcast is always going to be audio only because editing audio and video together is hard, and it's a lot of time, so not going to be doing that. But the thing I'm most excited about on my Patreon is the newest issue of Shibboleth, my weird cult, sci-fi, horror fiction. I have a new issue out called Some Call It Fiction, abbreviated SCIF. It's a fictional underground newspaper of UFO sightings, the strange and the unknown, and some stories sprinkled in from reality but tweaked by fiction. All written by me, no LLM/AI slop, all human made. That includes the art. You will get original art from Luca Visayo, Seth Hani, Andrea Atwood, and more coming in the future. First issue is live now. It's 2 pages. 2 newspaper pages. These are actual newspaper-sized files for Shibboleth. Some call it fiction. The first one's live now. Anyone pledging to the $5 tier of my Patreon gets the digital and print resolution files, but you can also just buy the issue by itself through my itch.io page or through austinrwilson.com/shop. those places you'll only get the digital resolution files. The only way you can get the print resolution files, in case you want to print these out, is to go through my Patreon. Again, it's patreon.shibboleth.me, or just go to the link tree and the show notes to find it. I appreciate you stopping by so much, and I would also really appreciate you rating the show, reviewing the show, leaving comments, sharing it, liking it, and yes, subscribing too. All of that seriously does help bump me up in the algorithm for wherever the show is posted and helps other people find it. I do the show with exactly 0 sponsors. It is literally just me doing this show, and I would like to keep it that way. And if you like what I do, thank you. Please give a thought to supporting however you can. I would greatly appreciate that. Listening is also included in that. So if that's all you can do, my hat's off to you. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much to Caroline Bicks for stopping by. Here is my chat with Caroline, author of Monsters in the Archives, My Year of Fear with Stephen King. One of the first things that I wanted to, this literally was the first question that I wrote down, and I bumped up questions, but this one always stayed at the top. In your acknowledgments, you say, it's on page 254 of Monsters in the Archives, you thank your mom for helping me get brave at my own pace, which really, really struck a chord for me.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk about what that means for you, what that phrase actually means for you a little more in depth, like getting brave at your own pace.
Yeah. When I started working on this book, I really didn't know how much of my own story, how deeply I would get into it. I was really lucky that I had and have, my mother is still alive, an extraordinary mother who, I was the third child of 4. I was very different than my others. All siblings are always different from each other, right?
Yeah.
But I was a very anxious little kid. And even though I grew up in a totally safe home with loving parents, my siblings were fine, but I just was really scared of the world,
Yeah.
and she, rather than pushing me and being like, well, get over it, she she started this ritual with me after school, and I write about this in the introduction to the book, where she was like, recognizing I didn't want to go hang out with other people. I just liked to stick close to her. That was
Yeah.
just who I was. We would read together from The Wizard of Oz, and I would actually, it's my first memory of reading a grown-up book, out loud to her. And it was this really powerful memory, and feeling very important, that I was getting this attention, and that she was just not rushing me. And reading that book, The Wizard of Oz, it really helped me plumb a lot of my anxieties. And it's only now as an adult looking back that I can see that, of course.
Yeah.
But that's a story about a girl who has no parents. So that's number one worst fear for me, is losing my parents.
Right.
Number two is her house gets ripped off its foundation and flung into some strange place. So that's number 2 and 3 of my other anxieties, right? It's like being away from home and being in a strange, unfamiliar place. And working through that story, really, on the one hand, a couple things. On the one hand, made me feel like just important, and also that I was learning, and that it was through a book, right, and through a story. So it's probably not a big surprise I ended up an English professor, just loving
Yeah.
the power of language and the power of storytelling. But yeah, so and then when I started working on this book, I was like, oh my gosh, The Wizard of Oz is everywhere in Stephen King's works, which I hadn't even registered the first time I had read his works. But then seeing how he was using The Wizard of Oz, and he gets it, that it's a scary book, that the
Yeah.
wizard is a scary dude. Um, and, I felt very seen when I started discovering that layer to King's own writing. So that's a long answer to your original question, but it's a very important story for me, actually, is that process of being allowed to discover and confront my own anxieties through a book at my own pace, with my mom.
And I'm curious about I guess the many layers of that bravery, because we talk about anxiety on the show quite a bit. I struggle with anxiety and depression still, and I have since I was very young, and I've talked to some other writers about it. So I'm curious about all of the ways in which that bravery has manifested for you, because you've done some amazing stuff
Oh, thank you.
and published some really, really cool stuff, and you're doing big things within the world of writing and intellectual thinking and scholarship. So I'm curious if the bravery that you're referencing there is professional bravery, personal bravery. Like, where do you think that line is? Or is there a
There
line?
is there is no line. Like
No line?
that's another thing this process, because I've been a scholar, you know, professionally for 30 plus years, and I've
Yeah,
done that academic writing, which on the one hand is brave, but on the other hand is also very safe because it's what I knew and and there aren't a ton of people that are going to be reading it. So it's like the audience is limited. That said, obviously it's very stressful being a professional academic, working your way through the process, but the rules are very clear. So I can see why actually now this is such a great question. These are amazing questions because I
thank
have
you.
not thought about these things.
Thank
But
you.
it's like, you know, picking being an academic is actually a safe thing for someone like me, right?
Hmm.
For someone who is good at school,
Yeah,
who likes rules, it's actually a pretty clear track. That doesn't mean that it's not a very difficult, stressful track that
sure.
can go terribly wrong, but it was comfortable. What was really fun for me with this project, with the Stephen King book, is that it was so outside my wheelhouse. I'm not a horror specialist. I was just someone who loved horror,
Yeah,
who also has a skill set of how to closely read, um, but also someone who still is very shy. Like I'm not someone. When I took this job at the University of Maine as the Stephen King chair, they told me you are not going to be meeting Stephen King. Do not reach out to him. And I was like, okay, I'm a rule follower. I'm good. I was disappointed because I
sure.
love Stephen King, but I was good with it. So then when he called me at home out of the blue 4 years into the job, I was confronting. I had to be brave in that personal level, in that I'm very, like, oh my God, this is a hugely famous person calling me, and I don't expect that kind of attention. And it's not. I don't assume that famous people would want to talk to me, so that but he put me so at ease right away, so that when I asked him to come speak to our students, that was sort of that's the first time I met him. And again, I write about that in the introduction to the book, but he was so kind. But I was going in thinking, oh, this is going to be scary.
Yeah,
It's a famous person. I don't, it's a stranger, um, and he was so so kind. And I'm also not the kind of personality that's going to be like feeling. I'm a third child of four, which puts me in a minority actually among academics. Usually their only children are first children because they assume that their ideas should be heard.
yeah.
And I'm always like, hey, want to hear my idea? So, to work up the courage, and I really had to do that, to ask Steve and Tabitha if I could do this
Yeah,
project. That was super scary, but I'm so glad I did it. So it tested my personal boundaries
yeah,
in a way that paid off in such a big way. And obviously, that has tons to do with Steve and Tabitha and how much they did put me at ease and made me feel like I wasn't some exploitive, predator.
yeah,
And obviously, I wasn't approaching them in that way. That's not my personality. But so I would say I became more brave doing this whole book, like being
yeah,
like, is it okay for me to ask Stephen King questions? It was like, yeah, I'd ask him questions. He would be so kind and like immediately respond.
yeah,
So yeah, I became brave in a lot of ways. Also, even writing a book that's not for an academic audience. Um, that didn't feel particularly brave. That was just fun. I was
yeah,
like, wow, I'm just going to go to town. This is amazing. I'm having a blast. But yeah, I would say like the part that was approaching Stephen King and asking him questions, that never felt like 100% comfortable. I mean, by the end,
yeah,
again, he puts you at ease, but it's not in my genetic makeup or temperament to to take advantage of that and feel like that's cool.
yeah. Well, I mean, along those same lines, and definitely related to the bravery and your being a third of four children,
Hmm.
and instead of being like you assume your ideas need to be heard or people want to hear them, having, well, one, the freedom to ask, because I know and you know as well, not all children have the freedom, unfortunately, or
Yep.
the support to ask if someone wants to hear their ideas.
Yep.
But I do think it speaks to the environment you grew up in, that not only could you ask, but it sounds very much like the answer was yes.
Yeah.
We want to hear your
We
ideas,
want to. I know.
and
Oh
that's a
my
big
gosh.
deal.
This is so therapeutic. I'm having It's true. And I
Yeah, well,
really, yeah. And you're right. I was so like, I also had incredible teachers,
yeah,
from kindergarten all the way through, who just, I was so fortunate
yeah,
that they took this like incredibly, I would have turned out completely differently, I'm sure, if I had grown up in a different, it goes without saying, but they were very patient with me. Everyone was very patient with me and made me feel ultimately that I was worthwhile.
yeah. That's
Very
very,
lucky.
very, yeah. I got lucky in similar ways. My mom always made sure I had books and always put them in my hand and always wanted to hear whatever weird stuff I was writing. So it was a big
Yeah.
deal. That
Yeah.
stuff has a lasting impact.
Yeah. And Stephen King's mom, same way. And I think when I
Yep.
get that's probably why that became such a heart to my book, which I really didn't think it would, but it just became unavoidable. Or,
Yeah.
I felt so connected to that part of his story that his mom, raised these two boys by herself, hand to mouth, like moving
Yeah.
them all around, but always made time to go to the public library, take out any book that he wanted, support his writing. Like maybe that's just the through line to anyone who feels good about themselves in their writing. And it's like,
Maybe. Yeah.
someone at home who just makes them feel like they're valuable.
Yeah. It's well, it's scary it is simultaneously both so empowering and scary to know how important that can be.
Yeah.
Because when it's not there, we see,
Right.
some of the fallout that can
What
happen.
if you get a Margaret White, like Carrie's mom, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Very, very different.
Hmm.
So I have a lot of questions built around the writing of the book. One of the things I wanted to start with, you maybe have answered this before, but I'm very curious for my listeners to hear about your emotions leading up to writing this book and the ways in which you handled fear and the task of tackling something like Stephen King,
Hmm.
this massive, presence within the world. And I'm curious if you had any sort of trepidation or discouragement that like lingered in your head because On Writing exists. And it is one of those books that everybody's like, oh, On Writing. So just talk to me about your like the mental emotional landscape leading up to writing it and kind of how you got
Well,
to starting.
I think there were so many different stages to this. And
Yeah.
once, I didn't go into the archives thinking, I'm writing a book. I went in thinking, I'm spending my sabbatical year having the time of my life, reading these manuscript drafts of these stories that meant so much to me when I was a kid. So I
Yeah.
picked those 5 books because those are the ones I read when I was a teenager and that were still sticking in my head. And I was so intrigued. And I knew I had this unbelievable opportunity being the first person granted access to these materials that I was so excited that I wasn't scared actually. Like once they
Yeah.
said yes, I was just having the time of my life.
That's
And
awesome.
it was scary only in the sense that sometimes I'd have to revisit these stories that
Mhm.
terrified me, but it wasn't that, it was a different fear. Like that
Yeah.
was more just like, if is there such a thing as fun fear? It was kind of fun fear. It's like, because also I had control over the process,
Yeah.
much like reading that first Wizard of Oz at my
Yeah.
own pace, right? It's like I could decide, you know what? I'm stepping away from The Shining for a few weeks because those manuscripts are getting too intense. So I could control that process. So yes, there were moments when it did get intense, and
Yeah.
especially with The Shining, when I was just like, "What? I can't read another version of that bathtub scene. It's just freaking me out too much." So, I would say that process was just, it felt in control.
Mhm.
And because I hadn't put pressure on myself to turn this into a book, I didn't feel any pressure. I was like, wow, I'm just going to whatever I find, I know that it's my own original discovery. And that also felt so empowering,
Yeah.
that I wasn't, as a Shakespeare scholar, all you do is spend your time like wading through the hundreds of years of Shakespeare scholarship, hoping you can find something new to say, right? But I knew, I didn't feel like, oh, On Writing's been written, there's nothing new I could say, because I knew, I mean, actually, this became clear as I would have conversations with Steve along the way. I'm like, this guy's written 70 books. He's not remembering every margin comment that he wrote back in
Right.
1974.
Right.
Like, and then it became for me an opportunity and fun because I could show him something he had done.
Yeah.
And I could feel like, you know, maybe it's fun for him too, like
Right.
to look at something that he had forgotten, right?
Yeah.
And show it to him and then get to have a conversation with him about what he thinks of it now, looking at it, or does he remember why he did it? So I felt like more of a conduit, to be honest,
Yeah.
between himself and his past writing, So, and I felt so privileged to have that position, but I also felt pretty in control of it. And I think that's my 30 years of being a literature scholar. Like I knew what I was doing. Like I knew I could recognize great edits or great changes to words, and I could talk about the effects, in a way that
Yeah.
I felt, that I have a mastery of. So then to add to it the fun of getting to hear his reflections and then to turn back and see how that might affect how I'm now thinking about what I'm seeing. Although, to his credit, he never interfered with the process. Like, he's an incredible, any writer who's worked with him will say the same thing. They're like, he's so generous. He was just go for it. He never
Yeah.
said, that's dumb or no, that's wrong. I mean, sometimes I would have an instinct that, or I'd found evidence, what I thought was evidence, that he must have been thinking of something, like when I was talking about the night surf story from Night Shift,
Yeah.
and discovered that there was, a pandemic, a flu pandemic sweeping the world when he writes that story as an undergraduate at UMaine. And I point that out to him. He's like, I don't think that's what I was thinking about. I was like, oh, come on. How could that not be what you were thinking about? But, so, I mean, there were times we would have those kind of interesting conversations about
Yeah.
what he remembered and what he didn't. But
I
other
also
than
like
that,
that sometimes he wouldn't answer. You asked him a
sometimes,
question very specifically, like, how does the Wizard of Oz play into Pet
right, like
Cemetery? And
why that motif?
yeah.
And that would only happen when we were emailing because, of course,
Yeah.
he could just choose not to respond to an
Sure.
email.
Yeah.
But if we were having a face to face, you can't run away. I mean, he could have, but he didn't. So yeah, sometimes I think he just either got too busy or just didn't want to think about that right at that moment. But I had the opportunity to circle back and, ask him again, for example, about The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. But it's always like it ties in with the idea of self-perception, which I was thinking about reading your book, and then also because I read a lot of his work and have a lot of notes from stuff that I've read in his work. I noticed some correlations between. So he has a quote in Different Seasons, the introduction to Different Seasons, where he's talking about his most of his books have been, quote, plain fiction for plain folks, and he describes them as being the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries. And then when you're talking to him about Pet Cemetery specifically, he says, I'm not great at words, but better than some, not as good as others, which is sort of what he says in Different Seasons. He talks about how he can recognize great prose, but he's just never good enough or capable enough of creating it. And he talks about Ian McEwan and Theodore Dreiser and Frank Norris and Different Seasons. And just as you and I have been talking, you said that you're not a horror specialist.
Well,
And
now I am, but I wasn't
that's
when I came in.
so, but that's so interesting though, because to
Yeah.
me, if someone has spent their life reading Stephen King,
Yeah.
like, does that not make you a horror specialist? Like,
Yeah, I know. That was me putting on my academic hat,
yeah,
and also wanting to give true horror academics their due, like
sure,
people who have committed themselves to studying and writing about horror. So
sure.
that's when I say I'm not a horror specialist. That was more what I meant, was that's not my field, you know.
I
But yes, you're right. If you've read enough, I suppose you could say, like, and now I think I definitely am certainly a specialist of Stephen King.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's just so interesting to me, especially from a scholarly standpoint. And like you said, not everyone's going to read scholarly writing about horror or even do scholarly writing about horror. But for me, like, I know what you mean, though, specifically, like if someone studies the genre as a whole
yeah,
and not just one practitioner of it. But I think because King has done so much and
yeah,
and so many varied versions of it, because even though, the stories in Different Seasons might not be quote unquote straightforward horror, there is horror in them.
of course.
So I'm interested in the ways in which you thought of yourself as a scholarly writer before and after finishing the book.
Yeah.
Has that
Okay.
changed a lot or no?
Another amazing question. I would say, because this was the first time I'd ever, because I had been doing first person nonfiction writing, sort of dabbling in that and really loving it, like writing some essays, and I love, and really discovering a different part of my voice through that kind of writing. And I've been doing that for like 10 or 15 years, but I had never brought that to to any kind of academic writing. And, I have the podcast that I do with my best friend, Michelle, who's a Shakespeare professor, and we read a cocktail book. So it's not like I hadn't experimented with bringing my specialty to a popular audience. But I would say this is the first time I was really taking both sides really seriously, like
Yeah.
not downplaying the academic part,
Yeah.
not downplaying the process of close reading or trying to make it be like, haha, I don't really know how to close to it. Haha. It's like, no, this is a serious skill and it matters like more than ever now,
Yes.
like we all need to
Yes.
be like my students. I always say to them day one, I'm like, are you sure you want to take this class? Because let me tell you, all we're going to be doing, everyone has to have a hard copy of, the book, and we're going to be doing a lot of close reading. So if that's not your thing, don't take this class. Like, we are honoring the words on the page. So that, I took very seriously, continuing to do that with this book, but also leaning into bringing in my humor. I'm a humorous
Yeah.
person. That's who I am. I love to write in a humorous way, and bringing that voice in, and also feeling brave enough to tell my story, to let my story, God, you really have hit a nerve with these questions. It's fascinating, like to feel like, what, yeah, my story matters too.
Yeah.
Like this can be part of this, like in fact, I don't think I can tell this story in the effective way I want to unless I bring my story in, because otherwise it will just be an exercise in close reading. Not that
Yeah.
that doesn't matter, but that's not going to speak to people in the way that I really want to try to speak to them. Like I really went into this book knowing it was not going to be an academic book, that this was something I wanted to challenge myself to write for as many people as I could, to make it accessible and relatable. The feedback I've gotten so far has been really rewarding. Like feeling like people saying, God, I felt like you saw me. Like I too was that terrified. Like even you saying I was that scared kid too. Or like,
Yeah.
when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with one another, it's just so rich. It's so powerful. And with academic writing, you're told not to ever bring yourself into it, right? Or
Right.
you're not allowed to. It's so limiting in that way, that this has been just like this, just torrent of love. Like people love Stephen King. They love talking about how his writing and his stories affected them and continues to affect them. And again, I feel like kind of this conduit, like I'm so privileged to be that person who's allowed to have had that access to that part of his process and those early stories that mean so much to people, and then get a chance, and that Steve was like, sure, go ahead and publish images of the manuscripts. Like that's, and I said to him, because we had a conversation toward the end where he was like, God, I feel a little bit like I'm walking around naked, like, to show
Sure.
like a page of Carrie, that first draft that's, he doesn't love, And I said to him, like, I think you're doing such a service to writers everywhere. It's to show them that you don't always get it right the first time. that's
Yes.
that's a great service, to be vulnerable in that way. So yeah, I lost track of what you originally asked, but that's
I
where my
I
mind went.
I think you nailed a lot of it, honestly.
Okay.
And that journey from not getting it right to finally getting it right, and with King specifically,
Hmm.
everyone largely agreeing that it is right. Like
Yeah.
it's a very, very interesting thing to see, because I noticed myself reading some of the excerpts from first drafts or second drafts, and being into them and
Yeah.
being like, oh, this is dope. I'm into this. And then finding out like he changed it all. Like there were some sections of Gage, which
Yeah.
maybe I think maybe I really latched onto the Pet Cemetery stuff. Because out of all of the ones that you talk about in the book,
Hmm.
it's the only one that I haven't read. So I was like,
You
do I?
haven't read Pet Cemetery?
I haven't. Yeah. So I
Ah.
I've read all of the others that you talk about. So I had this battle where I was like, am I going to read her talking about Pet Cemetery? 'Cause I know the story because of, multiple adaptations, which we'll get to coming up. But I was like, yeah, you know what? I think it's going to be really interesting for me to experience this in a way that I have no other way of experiencing it, because one, you're the only person who's done this. And then two, it was a book that I haven't read. So I got to see these weird, like, so being able to interact with it in that way where it's like, oh, this paragraph's awesome. And then I find out that he changed it. It is another way of sort of coming at writing where it's like, we don't know what's going to work, and you're no one can be correct by in guessing. It's just like it happens and it either hits or it doesn't.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things I came to appreciate about him and his writing process was just how organic it is,
Mm,
and that it's, he doesn't plot things out ahead of time, which he's written about,
yeah,
but actually seeing it for real, like,
right.
seeing how he really falls in love with characters and then lets that change what happens to them.
Yeah,
Like
it's super interesting.
I think that's definitely what happened, because I got to teach The Shining for the first time last year to a group of undergrads. We had such a good time. It was a class called American Ghost Stories.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
yeah, I'm becoming a horror specialist. I never would have taught a course like that, been allowed to 5 years ago. But anyway, Steve agreed to talk to the students about The Shining, and I took them to his house in Bangor. It was just this incredible experience, and he talked to them about how he. In the book, I talk about that first draft of The Shining, The Shine, that has a very horrible, different ending. And he was talking to the students about that change, and he said, I just fell in love with Danny and Wendy, and I just
Yeah,
couldn't do that to them. And I just thought that's incredible, like to just let the characters take on their own life and then become something, and then have that change the way you decide to go back and revise or
yeah.
rethink a storyline.
And change his life. Like Dr. Sleep wouldn't exist.
Right. I mean, if he had gone with his first instinct, we wouldn't have Dr.
Right.
Sleep.
It's really crazy to think
We
about.
wouldn't have that. But I think also, like, yeah, the changes he made to Gage were um God, very kind of subtle, actually. But
Yeah.
the more I got into it, I was like, oh my gosh, he's making Gage that little toddler still, even when he's a monster. And in that first draft, he's not. In the first draft, he's just like evil breath
Yes.
breathed. It was an evil spirit that occupies Gage, and he's not anything like little Gage.
Yeah.
And one of the, that I saw again and again in his redrafting process, that he would just lean into the human and lean away, pare back the gruesome, the gory elements.
Yeah.
Um, and so he's incredibly intentional with his process. That was another thing that I discovered day one, just with those word sounds, that
Yeah.
he's thinking about all the senses when he's crafting and redrafting, and how things are affecting the reader's ear, like especially word sounds really matter
Yeah.
to him.
There's a lot more that goes into it than I think some people may think, especially when you have read or heard some of the stuff he said in the past about not plotting. And he's a pantser. He goes by the seat of his pants. And I think maybe that can have the unintentional side effect of some people thinking, like, you just sit down and
You
let it
just
go.
exactly, and that I wanted to circle back, if I could, to something
Yeah.
you had said before about the it's the Big Mac and fries,
Oh, yeah.
like that kind of
Yeah.
rhetoric that he will use.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's because I am trained. I've read so many, like, medieval and early modern women's writings,
Yeah.
and it's called like the modesty pose, and it's something that women writers, because you weren't supposed to be a writer if you were a woman back
Right.
in the area that I study. There's often this, like, downplaying what you're doing, and that's kind of what I feel like with him too. That it's
Yeah.
like, it's not that he doesn't think he's really good at what he does. It's just that he's he's modest,
Yeah.
like he's not a diva dick. Like, that's
Yeah.
not who he is. And you can see it from day one when he's writing, when he's 16 and he's
Yes.
publishing novels or writing whole novels when he's 16. Like, he just, he's so well read, even at 16, 17, 18. He's making all of these intertextual references. and not to show off. I really just believe he's just so deeply read and widely read that it's just how it's like his love language is just this intertextuality. So
Yeah.
that when I had that conversation with him that I write about Wallace Stevens and the Emperor of Ice Cream and what's it doing in Salem's Lot. And on the one hand, he's like, well, I had to class up the joint, like I read that as like a modesty it's like, but also then he would say, but I also wanted people to take me seriously. So he was 25 when he's doing
Yeah.
that, that makes
He's
sense to me.
aware.
He's aware of it, but he's
Yeah.
also like is getting started and did not come from an elite school or an elite background. And so I think I appreciate that about him, that he's very relatable in that way too. A lot of us I think feel like shams, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't think he feels like a sham, but I think that because I was looking at all those early works of his when he's just starting to get his footing and in the wider public space, I could see him bringing his incredible learning into his writing and maybe sometimes being like, hey, I want to show you I am well read, right?
Yeah.
But also looking back being like, oh yeah, I was just trying to be like I think that's part of what makes him so charming is that
I
he's
think so.
he's
Also,
not an ego. He's not egocentric.
and it's a rare situation that he wouldn't be for where he is in contemporary American literature and just pop culture in general. Like,
Yeah.
there is no one higher when it comes to like consistent output of like mega bestseller. Like, he's in the top, and for him to just be, well, one, modest, I do think it connects with a lot of stuff that I was curious about that I wanted to ask you about, specifically in America right now, this like
Yeah.
anti-intellectualism,
Yeah.
this sort of backwards attack on higher thinking or close reading, even
Right.
that.
Specialization, right?
Yes, specialization.
Yeah.
And he didn't go to a school that everyone would look at and be like, oh, he went there. And a lot of it, I think, gets boiled down to classism and
Absolutely.
classist narratives. And I was curious about your experience with that and working up towards this book, because you did go to some of those schools
I
that people would, you went to Harvard, you went to Stanford. And
Yep.
I love that you are talking about Stephen King's work, because to a lot of people, and you will know much better than I will about the thing that I'm about to say, but I have a surface level understanding because I am a Shakespeare fan. But the contemporary narrative of Shakespeare, yes, having been a popular author,
Yeah.
uh, I'm just so curious about your experience with classist narratives, classist reductionism, and sort of attacks on intellectual thinking based on whether or not you're like, oh, what, just enjoy it, those kinds of things.
Wait, what's the just enjoy it? I'm curious. What do you mean? Like just
That people who are sort of shitting on close reading and intellectualism,
right. Like just yeah, yeah.
that
I
they
mean,
want to
there's so many
reject.
things I want to talk about right now. I feel like I
Yeah,
need to make a list because I'm going to forget them. Because now
yeah,
you've hit on like all of my things that are my things that make me nuts.
yeah,
So, I mean, the classism. Okay, where to begin? So first of all, yes, being a Shakespearean, like to me, this is so familiar. This is like
yeah,
exactly what Shakespeare went through. Like he didn't go to college. Now Steve King went to college, but nowhere fancy, right?
right,
And I think the reason that there's so many conspiracy theorists out there about Shakespeare couldn't have written these plays is because he didn't go to college. Yeah, I'm not the first person to say this. Whatever.
right,
Um, yeah, he probably didn't travel to Italy. He didn't do these things, and yet he's just amazing, has a great imagination, right? And I'm sure read a lot and, just self-educated, which I mean, he went to a great grammar school, but still, he's
yeah,
self-educated in the grand world of Elizabethan, published writers. Yeah, self-educated. So was Steve King,
yep,
and he was not taken seriously by the elite, in his time, Shakespeare. So I think I'm so familiar with that narrative that to me, I'm like, well, this is so ridiculous to talk about Stephen King this way. Like, oh, it's just slop,
right,
And I love to pull out, I mean, I have it right in front of me because to me, this is like also enrages me about academics and academia and elitism. You may or may not know about what Harold Bluhm said about Stephen King in 2003. Do you know Harold Bluhm?
I do know Harold Bluhm. I don't recall what he said, but I'm
Well,
sure
I'm
it's
gonna read it
bullshit.
right now. So Harold Bluhm, who has passed, was a Yale scholar of Shakespeare. He wrote many, important books. And he, in 2003, Stephen King wins the National Book Foundation's Distinguished Contribution Award. And Harold Bluhm writes in a very, I can't remember where it was either the LA Times or in some very big venue. He wrote that Stephen King was, quote, an immensely inadequate writer on a sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, book by book basis. His books do little more for humanity than keep the publishing world afloat. Okay, so to me, that enrages me in so many ways. And it makes me ashamed of scholars.
Yeah.
When they do that, I'm like, what? Have you read anybody? And then he edited a collection of essays about Stephen King, clearly for money. I don't know
I
why.
was going to say,
He
he
was
knew where that
cashing
money
in.
was.
He was riding on the Stephen King, got on the train, but continued to shit on him.
Yep.
So that's one problem. That's one thing you just got me getting enraged about.
Yep.
The anti-intellectualism. So here on the other side, though, I feel very defensive of the work that we do. Not defensive, like I want to defend.
Sure.
Right. What it is that a lot of us are doing who have committed their lives to studying language and studying literature and teaching.
Yeah.
That we're not just doing it to navel gaze.
Right.
That we're doing it because we really understand the power of writing and we want to explore it further. And yeah, sometimes we may seem like we're going too deep into a rabbit hole. I certainly have students who will say that, like,
Sure.
oh, is this really what they meant? I'm like, well, maybe.
That's why we're
but
engaging.
But the point
with
is,
it.
We're studying this thing. It's like, would you say that of, if you're looking at an incredible piece of music, would you be like, oh, did Taylor Swift really mean to put that chord there? Yeah. Like
it wasn't an accident.
Great works of art are rarely accidental.
Right.
And also, we're spending our time doing this work. How about you all just like, you don't have to praise us, but maybe just don't shit on us.
Yeah.
Maybe just like,
right.
Maybe recognize that maybe what we're doing will have some value that's not clear right now. Like I'm not training students to become multimillionaires, but I know that I'm helping them become more imaginative, creative people who feel good about their ideas.
Right.
And that's a service.
Yeah. And also there's a reason why the word humanities is there.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's what it is.
And don't even get me started on the AI thing. I mean, that's just taken all of the lifeblood out of the work that all of us are doing. I don't know a single teacher, no matter what level they're teaching at, who is like, yay, AI. Anyone who's doing humanities is like, this is sucking the life out of my students and out of the creative process and the critical thinking process.
You probably saw the Dave Eggers thing where he went to OpenAI and actually got a chance to talk to them. And he was like, what you guys have done is made every single teacher that I know's life harder. You've made all of these kids, you've essentially made them struggle for the next for their life. Like you're taking away a thing that is going to help define their lives.
I didn't see that one. Where is that?
I'll send a link to you. Yeah. They invited him because he wrote, I think it was Hologram for the King, I think, or The Circle.
Oh, yeah, yeah. This was like he was invited as a guest, like, speaker or panelist.
And he was like, by the way, shitheads.
Yeah, by the way, you've ruined everything.
What you're doing is terrible. And someone... me is about to tell you.
I think that was another one of the pleasures of doing this book was being able to, because I was just looking at the manuscripts from the 1970s. It was so analog. It's like it was such a relief. I'm like, with the exception of that final Pet Cemetery draft that he did on the Wang word processor, like it's all just handwritten notes. And I was like, but it was like taking a brain bath. It was like, I feel so good.
Such great.
It's like, remember the days when you could just, Yeah.
But even the Wang word processor, that to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I would use that. Like not connected to the internet. It's not popping up and being like, did you
Right.
mean this word?
Right. Oh my God. And I still can't because I'm of a certain age and my kids, whatever. I'm 59. Like, so for me, new technology, I can do it, but it's just going to take extra steps. It's
Yeah.
not intuitive.
Yeah.
And the AI stuff, I'm like trying to get it off my phone
It's
and
awful.
whatever. It's just, ah, it's a
Totally
struggle.
awful.
It's a struggle.
Along the lines of Shakespeare and of King and other stuff, I guess too, pop culture wise, do you think that if something becomes massively popular, that it's always, maybe not always, but like I guess more inclined towards heading for rejection from certain intellectuals that will find it to be questionable, the Howard Blooms of the world, which by the way, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, okay, Bloom's being honest. He's coming to this thing honestly, but then to edit the collection is when you're like, oh,
And I'm
you're
not
full of
sure. I
shit,
don't even know if
Hank.
he ever, yeah, I don't even know if he ever actually read any Stephen King.
Probably not. I mean,
um,
but
yeah,
does something getting popular enough
right.
signal to certain people, I have to reject this so that everyone else knows I'm serious?
I'm trying to think now, like, is there something that can occupy both that hasn't been through that ringer?
And
Mm,
it's hard.
I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to think of. I'm thinking about also like Yesteryear, which is
Mhm.
a book I avoided because I was like, oh, it's so popular. Not that I don't like popular books, but I was like, oh, it seems to
No,
be all about the controversy now. And then I read it and I loved it. I was like, okay, you know what? That's not a reason not to read something
right.
just because it's become such a part of the cultural discourse that I feel like I have to read it.
Mhm.
I'm really glad I did.
Did you
Um,
like it?
I did. I didn't love the ending, but whatever. I loved the whole conceit. I thought it was hilarious. Like
Yeah.
it's such a good satirical kind of take. But yeah, I don't know. Such a good question. I mean, I don't know. Can you think of anything that was like a blockbuster that was not taken down by certain
It's hard.
circles?
I don't think so, honestly, because anything my head goes to, Grisham and Rice, outside like the big mega sellers within writing,
Yeah.
um I don't like, I know that some books will land every once in a while where
Yeah.
kind of everyone agrees like, oh, we have to read this, we have to buy this, but I think it almost always then lends itself towards being viewed as popular, and that's
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I do think like James was a brilliant book, and I think
Yeah.
that did really, really well. And Demon Copperhead, I think there are some crossover books
Yeah.
in that way, but
I
yeah.
certainly have the authors that I think of, Michael Chabon being one of them, where
Hmm.
I adore Chabon and think of him as like this literary powerhouse, but he writes about stuff that I find to be sort of cross genre. I don't know that he's selling as many books as King, or but I don't know what his numbers are. But I don't know. It's just such a hard question because I love King. And
Hmm.
funnily enough, as a stupid 18-year-old, I was
Hmm.
like, I'm not going to read King.
Really?
That's yeah. So I was working at a video
Wow.
store
Yeah.
to put it into context how old I am now.
Yeah.
I'm 42. So I
Hmm.
was 18 and I was at a video store and I was like, I'm not going to read King. He's popular. I'm not going to read
What
that
were you
bullshit.
reading?
At the time, I don't even remember, honestly. So I was talking to a friend at the video store and my friend was like, dude, have you read The Long Walk? And I was like,
Long
no.
Walk.
And he was like, you should read The Long Walk. And he described it to me a little bit. And that was the very first King book that I read.
I love that that was your first King book.
Me,
I
oh,
just read that for the first time this year because I was going to go see the film.
hmm
And it blew my mind how good it was. And that
oh,
he was literally, he's 18 when he's
yep.
writing that book.
And so I read it as an 18-year-old
Yeah.
standing at the counter of this video store I worked at.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind.
Hmm.
I was like, holy shit, this is what I have been not reading?
Yeah.
And no joke, within the next 2 months, I bought 16 Stephen King books. And I fell hard. So
Wow.
the idea that I was avoiding it because it was popular stuck with me
That's
and has
fascinating.
yeah.
Because I think a lot of people I talk to, the first encounter is when they're 12 or 13. And so maybe that's a gateway age, maybe, because that's
Yeah.
when you're like, "Ugh, these are big, important, like thick books, and I'm not supposed to read them because they're too scary for me
Right.
or whatever." But the fact that you like got through without reading any, and then you hit 18, you're like, "Yeah, I'm too cool for it," is hilarious. Like I've never
Yeah.
heard that particular narrative
It
about
was very
Stephen King
strange.
books.
I know in high school I was into Lord of the Rings. I read a lot of comics,
Yeah,
and I was also reading a lot of Star Wars novels, and I'm very into science fiction and fantasy. So I would have naturally found my way there, but for some reason it I think I had latched onto the idea that I was above it.
fascinating.
And I'm glad that that Mikey, my friend,
Yeah,
was like, "Dude, you got to read The Long Walk," and yeah, he was right.
yeah. Mikey that's an aficionado. That's a very niche one to recommend.
I know, right? And the
It's not-
after
I mean, it's a Richard Bachman book.
I know after I got further into King, I was like, "Why was that the one that he told me to read?"
Well, I mean, if you're 18, it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's the sweet spot of that.
Yeah,
You know, he
yeah,
he was Hunger Gaming before Hunger. I mean, he basically invented every horrible scenario that kids go through.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I found out you were the Shakespearean scholar, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so interesting." Because I have talked in the past with some of my friends about King's adaptation level. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, holy shit, is Stephen King the same as Shakespeare? Because look at how many adaptations of Shakespeare we have. And then there's like 3 versions of Carrie. There's now 2 versions of Pet Cemetery. There's 2 versions of It. Like we're just constantly adapting his stuff. And it really started to look to me like he was the Shakespeare of the
This is
contemporary
what
pop
I've been
culture.
saying. Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for saying it very eloquently like that. The adaptation, the adaptability, right? That is what makes a great story.
Yeah.
That's what makes a story that endures, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason people want to keep adapting Hamlet, keep adapting Macbeth, keep adapting Romeo and Juliet, because these stories, yes, they're beautifully written. The language is gorgeous, but Shakespeare, like Stephen King, and they have a lot in common in terms of their biographies.
Right.
They have an understanding of how to tap into deeply human grief, human joy, human pain.
Yeah.
It's so when I found out that like The Shining, that Stephen King was thinking of Hamlet when he writes The Shining, which is why that first draft I found in the archives is divided into acts and scenes, because he was thinking of a Shakespearean tragedy. That's what he said. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God. Right. What makes Hamlet to me, because like you, like when I was like, I'm not going to read Hamlet. Like to me, Hamlet was like the play that I avoided forever because I was
Yeah.
like, ugh, whatever, Hamlet. Like, ugh, you know. And then because I also never really liked Hamlet the character. I was like,
Yeah.
whatever, get over yourself. Like he's not someone who speaks to like a teenage girl.
Yeah.
But then when I like found a way into Hamlet and started to think about and actually I have Stephen King to thank for this, because it was like coming at it. I mean, I had loved Hamlet before talking to him about The Shining, but there was a new layer of appreciation I had, because ultimately where I landed with The Shining and talking to him about it was like, The Shining is the reason that novel is so brilliant, and to me that's the one that will be around in 500 years if you had to
Yeah.
pick one. He understands intergenerational trauma, and like that's a book about intergenerational trauma. It's not a book about the woman in room 217.
Right.
Right. It's a book about, am I going to make the same mistakes my father made? Because Jack's father abused him, which you wouldn't know if you only seen the Kubrick film. Right. And then Jack is abusing his son. It's like, okay, am I going to, it's, and what's Hamlet about? Hamlet begins with the ghost of Hamlet's father coming and saying, you need to kill on my behalf.
Yep.
Right. And Hamlet being like, oh shit, am I going to be just reliving my father's world of, medieval tragedy, revenge tragedy, or am I going to change the narrative?
Yeah.
So those stories endure because these are crises that so many of us can understand and relate to. They're not supernatural.
Oh
these are
no.
these are real life horrors that we face. And so to me, the stories that keep getting adapted of his, like Carrie, for example, like that one, why does that stick around? And that was another thing I discovered looking at the drafts. It's like that first draft, she's just a monster with horns. Like, who
Yeah.
cares what happens to her? She's an exploding brain sac. Who cares? Whatever. You know, but by the time he's redrafted her, you feel so badly for her, but you also see like she is like the range of human emotions, and she gets everyone to hook into her thought process and her emotions and experience those emotions with her. That it's a deeply universal human story.
Oh yeah.
And that's why people keep telling it. If he had kept her as the alien with the horns, I mean, maybe people would keep making it, but I don't think people would. Yeah, not in the.
I
I,
don't think they
I
would
don't think.
latch onto
I don't
it
think they latch onto it. No.
especially when you see the Gage,
Oh yeah, poor
how
Gage.
Gage goes. Like the second he shows you that the monster is really just human,
Right.
is when you're like,
You're like, oh
oh,
no.
this is gonna stick with me for
I
a long
know.
time.
And I'd say like the revision that hit me, like there were so many of them that I found that just like hit me in the gut. That one, like when Rachel sees Gage and she's like, oh my God, Gage came back,
He's back.
And in the first draft, she just thinks it's her
Her
evil
sister.
sister
Yeah.
killing her, and he crafts this scene where literally she's getting stabbed. You see it, and, it's like her sister doing it to her. And then it's really is Gage
Yeah.
coming back to her. He's still going to kill her, but she doesn't know that. She dies not knowing that. She just is like, oh, my baby came back. And it's like, I want to cry just even talking about
Oh
it
no,
because,
it's
like, that's the
heartbreaking.
human. That's why that book. That's why I put it in the drawer and was like, I'm not publishing this. This is too horrifying
Yeah.
because it's like too horrible of a scenario to imagine.
I think the strength of the writing, because for me, and he talks about it in On Writing and in your book as well, where he calls the language plain or workmanlike or pragmatic or whatever, but I think that we as readers and scholars or people just, thinking about what they like even have to admit that the sentence doesn't have to be this giant creation in order to hit us and to change us.
Yeah.
And for me, like 11/22/63
Mm-hmm.
is a love story.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one of the most impactful love stories that I've ever read. And it's not because if somebody were to ask me, I wouldn't be like, the prose is going to blow your mind, but the story is going to.
Yeah.
It's going to have that impact on you.
I mean, I agree. And I think the plain language is part of, why it works. At the same time, I also see that he's so good at understanding that it's the rhythm of a line, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't necessarily have to have big words in it,
Right.
right? But like that change I found where he changes death is better to dead is better in
That is
Pet
better.
Cemetery. It's
Yep.
like that's a tiny thing. That's not a highfalutin word, but wow, what a difference it makes when it's dead is better, dead is better, dead is better, dead is
Yeah.
better. It
I
gets in.
mean,
It's like that's a rhythm that death is better is not. And so he understands the rhythm. Or think about like the greatest Shakespeare lines, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. That's not like some highfalutin language, but that's oh, I'm getting so excited talking about this. This is that's like my students think I don't know what they think of me, but we have a lot of fun. But anyway, I will sometimes just get like doing this what I'm doing. I know people listening can't see what I'm doing with my hands, but I get like this. I'm like,
yeah.
right, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable recorded. It's like, don't you see what that's doing? It's the language, the rhythm is finding another layer to the meaning he's trying to convey, right?
Yeah.
And that is what I saw King doing again and again too. So again, yes, it might be plain in the sense that it's not big vocabulary words that are alienating people. Like, what's that word? I have to look it up.
Right.
Actually, when you read Shakespeare, sometimes he was inventing words. He invented tons of words, but not to be like alienating, more to be like, hey, here's a word, eyeball. Like he invented that. It's like,
Which is
which
crazy.
is perfect. It's like, of course.
Yeah.
Eyeball. It's a ball. It's an eye.
Dry.
And when it's an eyeball and you're plucking out of someone's head, right?
Yeah.
So, they're both inventing words. Like
Yeah.
King invents that word fear bone, which is such a great word. Again, it's not highfalutin,
Yeah.
but it conveys something that the word fear and the word bone can't do on their own. But you put them together and you've just invented an entirely new concept that's so brilliant.
And sometimes the completely invented word is the only one. And the
Exactly.
dead versus the death thing,
Right.
man, I was so excited to see that change
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
because it is minor, but one of them is like you're going from a concept to a state of being,
Yeah.
like dead being different than death, and it really does change the sentence in a way that if you're focused on it and really doing that close reading, it's a
Yeah.
big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I almost missed that change because there was it's like 500-page manuscripts with Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I was like, I should maybe go back and look. When I found out how important that line was to him,
Yeah.
I'd read something where he wrote, so I was like, I should go back and see. I mean, it probably always was dead is better, but let's just go see. And that was one of those discoveries. I was like, oh my God, I almost missed it, because it was tiny. It's just one little word crossed out, with his handwriting dead.
Yeah.
I was like, that is cool. And I think it
Very
also
cool.
connects. I don't know if you saw the Pet Cemetery film from the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So Fred Gwynn, who plays Judd, who says that line, it's like, well, sometimes dead is better.
It's a good Fred Gwynn.
Dead is better. But it's also like Maine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Maine accents aren't brilliant in that film, but that particular, it's like, that's a very Maine, dead is better.
Dead is better.
That's different. Death is better. Not that.
No.
So it also captures the locale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's such a
And character. I think it's really built in character.
He's such a place-based writer, especially in those 1970s books. Yeah.
I think so too. Well, gosh, we have so much that I didn't get to cover, but we're wrapping up now.
Okay.
So I'm interested in your approach to creativity while writing because you've written some other creative nonfiction stuff. You've got some stuff in New York Times and NPR and McSweeney's, and so you've done creative nonfiction as we were talking about earlier. So I'm just so interested in the ways you used creativity as you were writing this book.
Wow, that's a big question.
I probably should have started there.
I guess I feel like any kind of intellectual, anything where I'm using my brain is creative.
Yeah.
I guess that's how I feel. Like I'm like anything where I'm letting language speak to me and I'm trying to figure out what I'm experiencing through it is a creative process.
Yeah.
So whether that's doing a close reading of an academic article or whether it's it's interesting. Yeah, when I'm telling my own stories, it's not like I'm thinking about language in the same way, I guess. So it's getting me thinking a lot about. You're probably like, why did I end with this question? She's never going to finish.
Should have been
my
first
I don't know.
question.
I write the way that I speak. I will say
Yeah.
that. So I'm a very oral. I always like when I was learning to read, I would always have to sound things out in my head, and I still do that. I'm a very slow reader, and I can't have noise around me. So I'm a very oral writer as well because I sound out what I'm writing in my head.
Yeah.
So I guess the creative process is figuring out how to take my own story and turn it into something that can be public facing, and that's something that other people that I think that's harder for me to do actually than to do an academic analysis because that just I'm so used to doing that. It's a little scarier, a little harder to figure out how to tell your story. Like I wrote that introduction, which is where most of my personal story comes out. I wrote it so many times, and I had a wonderful editor, David Ebershoff at Hogarth, who really helped me.
Yeah.
Where he'd be like, maybe, like teaching me the difference between writing as an adult about being a child and trying to write as the child, and like, no, don't try to do the latter. Like, don't try to just be the adult reflecting back. Like, if you're going to do memoir, that's So just learning that was challenging. Like that was probably the hardest part for me was trying to figure out the best way to bring my story into this. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and that's always a creative process, I suppose, bringing yourself to a wider audience.
Yeah.
You trying to find the language so that they'll get on the ride with you and root for you.
Yeah. It's hard. So wrapping up, what's next? What do you have coming? Are you doing more deep reading of King's books? Are you
Not right now. Yeah,
No?
I've been first of all, my semester starts in a few weeks. So, I'm back
A lot of work.
to all of that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give myself a chance to just ease off, and
Yeah.
not be like, what's next? Like, I got to go to the next thing, because I felt like this book was so perfectly satisfying for me. Like it just hit all of the places I wanted it to hit for me personally and intellectually and professionally, emotionally, spiritually, even, that I don't know if I don't want to dive into something too quickly. Like I really want to let it emerge organically, just as this book did, and see. So,
Yeah.
I'm continuing with my podcast. I'm enjoying talking to people about this book, and lots of events coming around Monsters in the Archives in the coming year. So I think I'm just going to see where the next thing leads me.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And everyone can find you at carolinebicks.com. Go check it out. Monsters in the Archives is out now. It's awesome. You officially are part of the Stephen King world, and
I'm going to King Con actually, and
oh,
in Atlantic City. I can't wait.
that's so awesome. I'm very, very happy for you.
Thank you.
It's a great book and it's a ton of fun. So I'm glad I got to read it, and I'm glad you came on.
Well, thank you for these amazing questions, Austin. It was a great conversation.
That was my chat with Caroline Bicks, author of Monsters in the Archives, My Year of Fear with Stephen King. A great book, definitely one you need to check out if you are a fan of writing, and if you're a fan of Stephen King's writing, and you want to learn more about it. So grab a copy of it, dive into it, get excited, get back to the page, think about writing deeply, and think about reading deeply, because those are both awesome. Really, really appreciate Caroline stopping by. I really, really appreciate you listening. Make sure you go to my website, austinrwilson.com, to my Patreon, patreon.shibboleth.me. That's M-E, to check that out if you want to support the show. The newest issue of Shibboleth, Some Call It Fiction, is out. It is a 2-page newspaper of fiction, brand new art. Only available print resolution through Patreon. You can buy it at itch.io or my website, austinrwilson.com, in digital resolution if you want to do that. But if you want to support me on an ongoing basis, Patreon is the best way to do that. I appreciate you stopping by so much. Thank you very much for your time. Look out. There's more coming. I have two more. So it will be 3 total episodes that I'm recording this month. So there's 2 more coming. So watch the feed. You've got more Ledger content coming your way fast. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.